There's two ways to approach silvopasture. One, if you're in a pasture with no trees, you can plant trees. I think what this question is I've got an area with some small trees, a lot of times we call this invasive woods, transitional woods. How can I prune it to get silvopasture? Right now it's whatever, thick. So let's assume that that's the case. First of all, you need to select trees that you want to keep. So what criteria do you want? So you were thinking of species. So you don't want to keep an ailanthus tree, for example, something that has no value. I like to go in with survey tape when I'm not in a hurry. And because when you're running a chainsaw or something, then you don't want to spend much time, thinking about it. So go in when you're not in a hurry with some survey tape as opposed to paint. A lot of people like to use paint. I don't like to use paint because you can't unpaint a tree. So with survey tape, if I change my mind, if I'm around and I change my mind, I can rip the tape off and replace it and take it somewhere else. So the first thing is to go in. The first thing is to decide, well, what kind of tree do I want to save here for long term? Then go in and find the keeper trees that you want to keep. And you got to realize that in general, again, with the question, there's so many variables here. How big is that? It's a big difference if you're young woods that you're wanting to convert to silvopasture, if they're 6-inch trees or 1-inch trees, tiny little saplings. But if they've got a little size to them, 3-4 inches, a lot of the bigger trees, then what you want to do is take the diameter, double it, convert it to feet, and not take out much more than that. In other words, if you've got a 4-inch diameter tree, 4 times 2 is 8. So go out 8 feet from that tree, and you can imagine cutting a perimeter around that tree 8 feet out from that tree. The reason that's important is because all trees have thousands of dormant buds up and down the trunk, and if you shock them with too much light, all of a sudden, those dormant buds will sprout, and you'll get all these suckers on the tree. That destroys the tree, and it's not healthy for the tree. So maintaining some shade against that trunk is critical for enabling that tree to grow on and be healthy and grow. And there's something valuable about that competition of heading toward the light. So you don't want to take out too much. You want to limit it. And the rule of thumb is diameter times 2 converted to feet. Diameter in inches times 2 converted to feet. That gives you enough light down to get some growth on the ground, but not so much light that it stimulates the dormant sprouting. Now, the other thing you have to remember is different species of trees have different opaqueness. So there are some what we call open canopied trees like locust, black walnut, things like that have a relatively small leaves and they're fairly open canopy. And then there are very opaque canopies like most of the oaks and certainly hickory. Hickory is probably the most opaque of all the canopies. The main thing there is to prune them up high so that sun actually comes in around the trunk and you grow grass around the trunk. If you leave low branches and the low branches get out, laterally, then they're going to shade and sun is never going to hit the ground. You're going to have bare ground under the tree. Now you're going to have erosion. It's not going to be a good thing. So if you want good silvopasture, you want grass right up around the trunks of the trees, which is a lot easier to get with an open canopied species than a closed canopied species. So, kind of rules of thumb, choose the kind of trees you want to eventually become mature, nice big, what we call cathedral trees. That's number one. Number two, mark the keeper trees with survey tape. Diameter in inches times 2 converted to feet is how far out you want to take it. Cut everything else. And realize that, so that's your kind of horizontal selection process. But then beyond that, if you have a closed canopy tree like an oak or a poplar or a hickory, those you're going to have to make sure that you prune them up high enough that you don't keep sunlight from hitting right up against the trunk. Those are kind of the general rules of thumb. There's such a difference between a 1/4 acre and 5 acres. There's a big difference even between 2 acres and 5 acres. So when you start talking about, small acreages, you really get into some nuances, and I'll try to go into some of those nuances here. For example, if you're dealing with something an acre or less, it's almost impossible to actually run a true chicken running out operation, because the chickens are just in the same spot all the time. They're in the same place, and they get familiar. In fact, we don't even recommend an eggmobile for acreages under 50, because you can't get the chickens unfamiliar enough that they go back to a home base all the time. And home base is the lawnmower handle, the swing on the back porch, and of course wherever chickens find home, they leave a calling card. And so then when mom goes out to sit on the swing, she sits on chicken dew, and then mama ain't happy, and we all know when mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. So if you have a very small acreage, and I'm going to say something under an acre, I encourage people to not have their chickens ranging out. Confine them on deep bedding, with a run, but not a dirt run. Make it so that it's got a wall, 30 inches high, even more, and feed it your garden weeds, feed it, wood chips, feed it leaves, your neighbor's leaves, kitchen scraps, all this stuff. And over a year, that yard, that run will turn into the richest compost in the world, and it'll be your compost for your garden and your fruit trees and all that stuff. If you've got a backyard, if that's all you've got, chickens running out, the kids are going to track chicken manure into the house all the time. So there's a place for pasturing, and there's a place for not pasturing. And I think when you get really, really small, it becomes problematic, because the chickens wear out where they are, and they leave too much. They get too familiar with, and then they lay eggs. They lay eggs, under the little tool shed. They lay eggs under the the garden rake, the garden tools, and so it's an Easter egg hunt every morning. So generally, what I encourage folks to do with this very, very small acreage is look at your grocery list. What can you raise? What do you like to eat? There's no reason to raise something you don't like to eat. Now, unless you go up to something in the neighborhood of, at least in most places of the country. Again, there's a big difference between 3 acres in Nevada and 3 acres in, Rabun Gap, Georgia, that gets 100 inches of rainfall a year. So in general, in North America, I wouldn't get a cow unless I had at least 3 to 5 acres, if you want to milk a cow. Below that, that becomes problematic. As far as pigs, pigs are very conducive to a stationary pen with deep bedding in it, and they only need, if they've got 50 square feet of pig, they'll be just fine. And again, feed them junk hay, feed them old leaves, wood chips. They'll churn it around, and again, this will give you a great base. Sean and Beth Doherty, I think, are probably the best in the world. They explain that on a very, very small acreage, you're always struggling to get fertility. How do I keep my soil fertilized? And so the pig pen with this deep bedding, making compost, It doesn't smell. It doesn't attract flies, and it will give you concentrated compost for your fruit trees, your berry vines, your all that stuff. So generally, on an extremely small acreage, yes, start replacing your grocery bill. You definitely want to raise meat chickens, laying chickens. Those are, to me, the chicken is the starting animal. Maybe you have some rabbits. If you've got over 3 or 4 acres, you could have a milk cow if you wanted it. And then if you've got 6 or 7 acres, you could obviously raise a couple steers for beef. And the pigs can be done in a corner of any little side yard with basically no more area than you'd have for a small flock of 20 chickens. And so then now you've got your eggs, your chicken, your pork, and you're up and running. And the rest of the space you turn into edible landscaping, gardens, beds, fruit trees, things like that. And then you're replacing the first goal is to replace your grocery bill, because every dollar you save is worth about $1.40 because you haven't paid taxes on it. So that's the whole idea.